Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because we're about to unpack the truth behind one of India's most fascinating, enduring mysteries. We're looking at a place that pulls in hundreds of thousands of searches every single year, literally second only to the famous Bengal fort in India's paranormal landscape. But look, instead of just recycling those same old ghost stories you've probably heard a million times, we're going to look at the real history, the actual environmental data, and the fascinating science of human perception to figure out exactly what is happening in the misty forests of Dow Hill.
To really understand the mystery, we first have to understand the place itself. Welcome to Kurseong. By day, it's a breathtakingly beautiful hill station. If you visit in the sunlight, you'll see sprawling tea estates, lush mountain slopes, and these stunning, vibrant orchid gardens. But the second the sun goes down, the vibe completely shifts. That exact same picturesque landscape transforms into what is widely known as India's most haunted forest, a place with a deeply dark psychological reputation and just countless reports of the unexplained. Let's get our bearings for a second. Kurseong is tucked away in the Darjeeling hills of West Bengal, roughly 30 kilometers from the famous town of Darjeeling. So we're not talking about some easy-to-reach urban center here. It is way out there in the dense, mountainous terrain of northeastern India, mostly accessible via these winding, foggy roads and the historic Darjeeling Himalayan Railway.
Okay, I want you to lock this number in your brain as we go through this explainer. 4,500. That is the elevation in feet of Dow Hill. And that high-altitude isolation isn't just a fun little trivia fact, it's actually absolutely crucial to the scientific puzzle we're putting together today. You see, elevation changes how we perceive things, both physically and psychologically. And at 4,500 feet, the environment really starts playing tricks on you.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the legends of the Death Road, specifically the woodcutters, whispers, and the Headless Boy.
The folklore here focuses heavily on a notorious stretch of path between the Dow Hill Road and the local forest office that locals literally call the Death Road. And the stories? They're genuinely bone-chilling. Take a listen to this account reported by the Times of India. The local woodcutters have had a harrowing time watching the headless ghost of a young boy walking and disappearing into the forest. Seriously? No way you don't get chills from that. And it doesn't stop there. People constantly report being followed, feeling like they're being watched by some unseen entity, and some even claim to have seen a strange red eye peering out at them from the dense vegetation.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that we're not just looking at variations of one single urban legend. We actually have two completely independent categories of reports. On one hand, you have the Headless Boy, heavily reported by local woodcutters who actually work on the road. But then, you have entirely separate sightings of a woman in gray wandering the adjacent forest, which is mostly reported by visitors and tourists. Having two distinct, independent apparitions proves this isn't just one recycled story. Different demographics are experiencing completely different phenomena in different parts of the woods.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Heritage School Mystery, or Whispers in the Winter. Let's shift our focus from the untamed forest to a very specific, man-made structure nearby.
This is the Victoria Boys' School, a heritage government boarding school sitting about a kilometer away from the Death Road, and it carries its own incredibly eerie reputation. Just look at the history. Established in 1879 by Sir Ashley Eden for railway employees' kids. In 1888, it became boys only. Then, in 1898, it moved to its current location and was renamed to commemorate Queen Victoria. Picture classic, imposing 19th century colonial architecture. Massive stone and brick walls, huge high ceilings, and these incredibly long, echoing corridors.
Now here's where it gets weird. The claims around the school are highly specific. During the regular school year, everything is totally normal. But during the harsh winter months, from December through March, the school shuts down completely. It is entirely empty. Yet, during those vacant months, the guards and locals consistently report hearing loud whispering, the distinct sound of running footsteps, and boys' voices echoing down the empty halls.
So, what is actually going on? Let's dive into Section 3, the environmental science, profiling the paranormal.
This is where we look at the brilliant, evidence-based analysis by the Indian Paranormal Society, or the IPS. And honestly, the biggest mistake travel bloggers make is treating Dow Hill like it's one single haunted spot. Actually, scratch that. Treating it as one place totally obscures the truth. It's really three distinct environments. You have the dense mountain forest of the Death Road, the colonial architecture of the school, and the broader residential tea estates. Different environmental rules apply to each one.
The IPS didn't just go looking for ghosts. They built an environmental profile of the area. They identified 4 major factors that combine to create what they call a reliable, experience-generating environment. Check these out: persistent mist causing low visibility, temperature inversion effects, dense mountain forest acoustics, and the psychology of isolation and altitude. When you mix those 4 things together, you literally get an environment perfectly designed to make human beings see and hear things that aren't actually there.
Let's break that down, starting with how our eyes work. In clear daylight, your brain easily identifies whatever is in front of you. But Dow Hill is famous for its exceptionally frequent thick mist. When visibility drops to near zero, distant objects become completely ambiguous. And in those conditions, your brain kind of panics and defaults to pattern recognition. It desperately tries to force a meaningful interpretation onto ambiguous data. So, under maximum intensity mist, an odd shadow intersecting with dense vegetation, your brain can easily interpret that as the body of a headless boy walking along the road.
Then you have the acoustics, driven by a wild phenomenon called temperature inversion. Because we're at that 4,500-foot altitude, you get distinct layers of air sitting at different temperatures, and this drastically messes with how sound travels. Sounds can suddenly bounce in entirely unexpected directions or carry over crazy unnatural distances. Now add the natural acoustics of a dense forest, sound filtering through thick undergrowth and twisted root systems. A totally normal animal rustling in the brush, heavily distorted by temperature inversion, can suddenly sound eerily, terrifyingly human. And this perfectly explains exactly what's happening at the Victoria Boys' School. Remember those winter whispers? Well, during term time, you have the ambient masking of hundreds of rowdy kids. That constant background noise totally covers up the natural sounds of the building itself. But in the dead of winter, when everyone leaves, that ambient masking completely vanishes. Suddenly, you can hear that massive 19th century stone architecture naturally contracting in the cold. You hear wind whistling through specific structural gaps, and wildlife moving around up in the roof. In an empty, echoing building, those natural acoustic activities are super easily misinterpreted as footsteps and whispers.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, mystery solved, we've entirely debunked it. But hold on, let's look at Section 4, a genuinely unresolved location. Despite all this incredible environmental science, the IPS actually refuses to completely close the book on Dow Hill. They still classify it as one of India's few genuinely unresolved locations. Why? It boils down to 3 things. First, the origins. Most haunted sites make up stories after they get famous to drive tourism. But the Death Road name and these woodcutters stories, they predate the internet and paranormal tourism entirely. These local laborers had absolutely nothing to gain from making up stories that would just get them ridiculed. Second, the consistency. These specific reports have been documented for decades across totally different demographics, from local Lepcha tribes to British-era school staff to modern-day tourists. And third, the claims are testable. The winter acoustics at the school happen on a set schedule every single year, meaning it warrants real, controlled scientific acoustic monitoring, which hasn't even been fully executed yet.
So what's the big takeaway here? Dow Hill isn't just some cheap ghost story. It is a phenomenal intersection of history, geography, and human perception. But it does leave us with one final, incredibly provocative question. Is every single thing reported at Dow Hill simply the result of mist, complex acoustics, and altitude psychology playing tricks on the human brain? Or, deep in the dense, dark woods of Kurseong, is something else truly wandering the death road? I'll let you decide. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.